one of the most important attributes we think as a founder is perseverance, not blind perseverance, but perseverance, because you're going to hear a lot of no's and you're going to see a lot of dead ends, right? And I think the reason I said not blind perseverance is because, look, if you fundamentally in an unemotional way believe you are building something that people want and you believe that that will make unit economical sense, you should probably persevere at all costs.
Welcome back. We've got another exciting edition today of Very First Win. I am your host, Robert Hilmer, also founder of Goanna Capital. Goanna is a global investment firm. We are shareholders of companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, Canva, Rippling, Neuralink, SpaceX, and many other private technology companies. So getting into it today, we have Chaz Englander. He is the founder of a really, really exciting company called Model ML. I'll pass it to Chaz to maybe just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about the business, and then we'll get into your very first win. Nice to have you here.
For sure. And look, thanks so much for having me. So, what can I tell you about myself? So, I've been building software companies my whole life with my brother, Arnie. First business was a consumer marketplace, moved out to San Francisco when we were very young and got on YC and raised a great Series A. We sold that business to a competitor of ours for about 45 million into the mid 2019 time. We stepped out, didn't know what we wanted to do. I think it was actually my mum that told us to go and build something else. I think we were annoying her too much, to be honest with you. Turned out we decided to build a last mile grocery delivery business 3 months before COVID. Obviously incredibly lucky by way of timing. We raised about 10 million straight away. And then we were out raising 100 million in the fourth quarter of 2020. And GoPuff ended up raising a billion led by SoftBank. And we sold the business to them quickly and very successfully. Then we started a small kind of family office set up. We hired a few people to do that. And we spent a lot of our day writing software to improve that process, to improve the process of investing. And that software got very good. And then the end of 2024, decided to go at it full time. So it was a workflow automation tool for finance. That's basically what we were doing for ourselves. Then we raised about 100 million across 2 rounds in our first 12 months. So it's been a bit of a quick ride.
Awesome. Well, tell us about your very first win. I know it's an exciting story or an interesting story. I know it quite well now. But for the audience, talk me through your very first win.
Well, so when we were starting our first company, so the first company was a consumer marketplace business that allowed people to rent items from other people nearby fully insured. So you could effectively lend your camera out to someone and you would be fully insured in doing so, which you can imagine, if you're back in 2015, we were saying to people they could do this, they'd be like, no way am I doing that. It's going to be stolen type thing. And I think that, we had no money. We were trying to raise money. We couldn't raise money. And I said to myself, look, this is a numbers game. We only need about $50,000 to leave our jobs at the time. And these were just like grads jobs, really, Franz and I. And I said, all right, well, I'm going to go down to Canary Wharf. That's where a lot of finance people work in London. I'm going to ping a bunch of people on LinkedIn. And I'm going to be doing like 20, 30 pitches a day. So I did that for a few days and eventually, we got one person say yes, put in a really tiny check, and then they introduced me to someone that they know, and the rest was history. But it was really that small moment where, someone said yes after 100 people saying no. And that's what kind of catalyzed the rest of that first business.
Nice. There is always a yes. I think people almost, it's such a fine balance. And given how many exits you've had and businesses you've built, it's not an easy question to answer, but how do you try to sort of walk between those fine lines of listening to the market, because the market always knows the answer, but also not just taking no for an answer and having the discipline and the commitment to keep trying? There is a very fine line there. What's your experience with that?
Well, Arnie and I were on the Y Combinator podcast recently, and on YouTube, we spoke about this a little bit. And, one of the most important attributes we think as a founder is perseverance, not blind perseverance, but perseverance, because you're going to hear a lot of no's and you're going to see a lot of dead ends, right? And I think the reason I said not blind perseverance is because, look, if you fundamentally, in an unemotional way, believe you are building something that people want, and you believe that that will make unit economical sense, you should probably persevere at all costs, right? And I think there's a difference. If you're getting 1,000 no's and you really don't think this will ever make sense, then yeah, that's not what I'm saying. But if deep down you know this is something people want and the unit economics are going to add up, you should persevere for sure.
And once you got the check, how much did you end up raising there after the
That
first
was our
50K
third,
check?
yeah, fifth. No, 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 it wasn't. No, 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 Robert. This was like, I think it was like a 5 grand check and a 50 grand round. Dude, this was like,
Oh wow.
dude, this was like, we were like grads. We didn't have any money. Like, we would
I
do
see.
any for any money, right? But I remember thinking, man, that was like 30, 40 meetings for like a 5 grand check for a 50 grand round. This is going to be an uphill battle, right? But
Hmm.
you realize that you're not pitching to the person in front of you a lot of the time in those early rounds. You're pitching to all the people that they ultimately know. And that's what
Hmm.
happened. It kind of ended up spiraling from that.
Awesome. And I think you have a story as it relates to YC, right? And a car ride.
Yeah. So, oh man, it's
Let's.
kind of
I like. I
embarrassing.
like this. I like this one. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. It's kind of embarrassing, I guess. But uh, I was definitely one of those, like, 18, 19, 20, 21 year olds that was like obsessed with building companies. Like, all I wanted to do was build a company, right? And so therefore, naturally, particularly then, I was obsessed with YC. Like, I knew all the YC partners, I'd followed their backgrounds, I listened to every single YC podcast. And back in the day, it was Aaron Harris and Kat Manialik. And anyway, we got a YC interview. We'd flown out to San Francisco, and I think the interview felt like it went pretty badly, right? So we were like, this isn't going to work out. Let's stay on our flight this, because if you got on, you're supposed to stay the next day. But if you didn't, that's it. You can go home. So we were on the way back to the airport, because this was back in the day where they were down in Mountain View as their main office. They're now in Dogpatch, right? And I was on the way up in the car, and I get a call on Skype, and this is how they did it with, like, back in the day where people were not from the US. And I was like, holy, this is Aaron Harris, right? And I'm like going in full panic mode here, sat next to the Uber driver in the front of this Prius. And I like pick up the phone, and bear in mind, I'd listened to like hundreds of hours of Aaron Harris's, voice through the podcast. And I was like, hello? He was like, hey man, Aaron Harris here, how are you? And I was like, oh, hi. Hi, Aaron. I thought I was listening to a podcast then. And he was like, okay, what, never mind. How are you, man? And anyway, it was pretty embarrassing. But yeah, then he was like, we'd love to fund you guys. And I'm like going crazy in the front. The Uber driver's turning around to me. He's like, hey man, I got to get in on this. How do I get in on this? Because I'm talking about how we're going to be the next $10 billion company within 2 minutes of being told we're getting on YC. But yeah, those are the moments you remember for sure.
It's awesome. Um, how we have a pretty diverse audience. How old are you?
34.
At 34, you've probably had 5 lifetimes worth of most folks' failures, lessons, successes, etc. What are some things that you just find yourself remembering? Like when something happens in business, a letdown, a customer says this, a problem with the product, someone leaves the company and churns, whatever it is. What are the things that run through your mind that you can think of now that
Well,
that help you with all of that?
well, I'll start with a nice feeling one, and then I'll start with where you're like, scared as hell as a founder. The nice feeling one is, I remember, when we ended up selling Fancy in the end, it was like 2, 3, 4 a.m. We were in an office in London at the time, and you get a call from the lawyer, and the last signature's in, and the signatures are being released, and it's boom, and the money's released. And I remember the call, and uh, there was 20 people there, right? It was like the first 20, by the time we sold, about 120 people, maybe 110, 20 people there. And, the lawyer turns around and goes, well done, everyone. You are all now way richer than I am. And those that, they're clearly the ecliptic moments, right? They're the ones that like you look around and you're just like, you're so pleased that everyone's there. Everyone deserved it. We worked our ass off for sure. Um, but it's also then the build up to that. That's what Arnie and I enjoy. You don't go and build a third company after you sold the first two because, you're motivated financially. You're doing that for the love of the game, right? We absolutely love building software, writing software, creating things that people want. A bit of a scary story. So you come back because I think it has got easier, right? In the first company, it's like it's everything. In the first company, as I said earlier, we were building a business that we convinced ourselves, we convinced our family, friends, our shareholders, everyone around us that you could make a company where people would lend out items and you could ensure that, in other words, that those items would not be stolen, right? And our very first rental ever, right? So this wasn't in the days of Claude Code and Cursor. An MVP took 3 months, not a couple of days at the most, right? So we'd spent 3 months writing code. We launched, and boom, the rental comes in, £600 to rent a drone. And me having studied accounting and finance, I'm straight in the model. I'm updating our average order value from $30 to like $700-800 or whatever, and we're over the moon. And then it got to when the drone was due to be returned, and the borrower, the lender of the item called us. It's like, the guy's not picking up. It's like, where's my item? This guy's not picking up. And immediately as a founder, you're playing all this stuff back. You're like, man, I'm going to let my team down. I'm going to let the shareholders down. I'm going to let everyone down. And anyway, we knew this guy's geolocation because when you search on the app, we saved geolocation. So we got in a cab up to this. Bear in mind, as a founder, this is everything. This is everything to you, right? And all that's going through my head as I'm in this cab trying to locate this item is like, this is never going to work. I've let everyone down. I've lied. I've stolen this money. You're telling yourself, right? Stolen this money from shareholders because it's not going to work. Anyways, we get to the road because it wasn't an address. It was a geolocation, lat long. Doors open on this road. I walk in and this place is a complete tip. And I'm a 22-year-old software founder. Like I'm in the middle of nowhere. I'm in some place that I've never been. I walk into the living room and there's some guy asleep holding on to this drone. I'm not joking. He's holding on to this drone, and I just pick up the drone and walk out. And then I'm like, okay, I take it down to the lender. I arrive at the lender's house I'm now in this state, just thinking the company's over. And I open the door and he's like, hey, you're not the borrower. Who are you? I'm like, and I noticed I've got a Fat Llama t-shirt on, which was the company's name. I was like, we do deliveries as well. We bring it back for you. He was like, this is awesome, and closed the door. And look, we figured that out. And you do. Again, it's that perseverance thing. We knew that we could write an algorithm that would be able to verify people to a level that would be able to ensure it, and ultimately did. And we found product market fit, and the business ended up being incredibly cash flow positive. But you have to persevere through those moments.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of scaries. And I think the most difficult part is, at least early on, you'd be more than accustomed to it now, but when you have a team, the team just thinks you're going to be used to it as the founder and you'll know how to, but you have no idea that obviously you have to keep your composure and think through it, but you have absolutely no idea what to do and are probably just as scared, if not more scared than them.
For sure. I mean, now now I think you become very immune to the kind of the emotional roller coaster Arnie and I call it. But I'm very good friends with a group of founders, European founders who are part of this group. Everyone's raised, in their current company, at least 100 million. I mean, there's folks in there now that have raised 1 billion, in the last few years or so. And it's actually a thing, right? We say, such and such is he's getting into character, or she's getting into character. And it's a thing. It's like, as a founder, you got to play the part. You got to do your role. And the reality is of this, as particularly as a founding CEO, is you're making the final call, and I think everyone's got to wear that. But for sure, a lot of the time, hell no, you don't know whether it's going to be the right call.
I really enjoyed the conversation today. Thanks a lot, Chaz.
Thanks very much.